They called it boring basketball, but if you listen closely, it sounded like poetry. 5 men moving in rhythm, no ego, no spotlight, just the sound of a perfect pass echoing through time. For 20 years, the San Antonio Spurs didn't chase fame, they built structure. While the world worshipped highlights, they worshipped habits. While other teams drafted stars, they drafted students. And while super teams rose and fell like stock prices, one small market machine kept printing wins, 50 a year for 2 straight decades. This wasn't luck, this was a laboratory of excellence. From a Navy admiral who saluted the game, to a quiet giant who redefined leadership, to a head coach who turned discipline into a weapon. The Spurs were never designed to entertain, they were designed to endure. And in the process, they became the most consistent force the sport has ever seen. This is not the story of a team that won 5 championships. It's the story of how a forgotten franchise built the longest dynasty in NBA history. Not through talent, but through truth. This is the Spurs way. Before the banners, before the dynasty, there was a team without a home. In 1967, they were the Dallas Chaparrals, a small ABA franchise playing in half-empty gyms, sharing arenas with minor league hockey and struggling to fill seats. But in 1973, everything changed. A group of Texas businessmen took a gamble and moved the team south. San Antonio embraced them instantly. The Chaparrals were reborn as the San Antonio Spurs. The city didn't just adopt a basketball team, it adopted an identity. Blue-collar fans, gritty basketball, loud arenas that shook like earthquakes. Within 3 seasons, the Spurs joined the NBA during the ABA-NBA merger. And unlike most teams that needed years to adjust, San Antonio exploded onto the scene. At the center of it all stood a man known simply as the Iceman. George Gervin didn't talk much, he floated. His finger roll was silk, his scoring effortless, his presence electric. He led the league in scoring 4 times and carried the Spurs to 7 straight playoff appearances. But for all the flash, there were limits. The Spurs came close, but never close enough. The Iceman's elegance couldn't overcome the giants of the era. Kareem, Bird, Magic. As Gervin aged, the Spurs faded. Yet even in defeat, the city stayed loyal. Because San Antonio had seen a glimpse of something real. A culture forming beneath the surface, waiting for the right leader, the right player, and the right philosophy to transform potential into power. The storm was coming. By the late 1980s, the Spurs had talent, but no direction. The Iceman era was gone, the fans restless, the spark fading. Then came a twist of fate, the 1987 NBA Draft. The San Antonio Spurs selected David Robinson, a 7'1" center from the U.S. Naval Academy. A man of discipline, a man of order, a man who would rebuild the franchise's soul. He couldn't join the team right away. The Navy still owned his next 2 years. But when Robinson finally arrived in 1989, he was everything the Spurs needed, and more. A walking statue of dominance, blending raw athleticism with military precision. In his first full season, the Spurs won 56 games, a 35-win improvement from the year before, the greatest turnaround in NBA history. San Antonio had its hero. The city had its belief back. Robinson averaged 24 points, 12 rebounds, and 4 blocks while changing the identity of the franchise overnight. Suddenly, the Spurs were feared again. With teammates like Terry Cummings and Sean Elliott, they became playoff regulars. But the 1990s Western Conference was a battlefield. Every year, Robinson clashed with legends: Olajuwon, Malone, Barkley, Drexler. He won MVPs, scoring titles, and Olympic gold, but never the ultimate prize. The Spurs were contenders trapped in a cycle of heartbreak. By 1996, time had caught up. Robinson was injured. The team unraveled. The Spurs won just 20 games. For the first time in a decade, San Antonio's future looked uncertain. But hidden in the wreckage was destiny. Because in the chaos of that broken season, a quiet man in the front office named Gregg Popovich made a decision that would change basketball forever. He took over as head coach. He tore everything down to rebuild it in his image. And the universe rewarded that faith with one ping pong ball and one player who would redefine greatness. The next chapter of the Spurs wasn't born in victory, it was born in humility. The 1996-97 season was rock bottom. The Spurs had fallen from contenders to catastrophe. David Robinson was hurt. Chuck Person was hurt. The losses piled up like bricks. And by mid-season, Coach Bob Hill was fired. Stepping in was the team's general manager, a man few fans knew, but everyone would soon learn to respect, Gregg Popovich. He wasn't a celebrity coach, he was a strategist, a former Air Force Academy graduate who believed in structure, accountability, and selflessness. Popovich inherited a broken team, but he saw something others didn't, a chance to rebuild from the ground up. The Spurs limped to just 20 wins, but what looked like disaster was divine intervention. The lottery smiled on San Antonio again, granting them the number 1 pick in the 1997 NBA draft. Popovich knew exactly who he wanted. Before the draft, he flew to the U.S. Virgin Islands to meet a quiet, humble 21-year-old from Wake Forest, Timothy Theodore Duncan. For 3 days, they talked about life, family, responsibility, everything except basketball. Popovich didn't need flash, he needed foundation. And Duncan was the perfect cornerstone. When the Spurs drafted him, the league shrugged. When he debuted, the league was shocked. Duncan averaged 21 points, 12 rebounds, and 2.5 blocks as a rookie. He won Rookie of the Year, made first-team All-NBA, and instantly transformed the Spurs from broken to balanced. Alongside Robinson, they became the Twin Towers, a force of quiet dominance. By 1999, the experiment became Empire. With veterans like Mario Elie and Steve Kerr, San Antonio went 37-13 in the lockout-shortened season, then stormed through the playoffs. Duncan was unstoppable. The Spurs won their first-ever championship, defeating the Knicks in 5 games. Duncan was Finals MVP. Afterward, Popovich told Jeff Van Gundy, "I've got Tim, and you don't." He wasn't boasting, he was stating prophecy. The Spurs had found their soul, a player without ego, a coach without compromise, and a culture that would outlive them both. The dynasty had begun. By the early 2000s, the Spurs had their anchor, but every dynasty needs an army. Popovich and general manager R.C. Buford didn't chase stars, they built soldiers. In 2001, they took a chance on a 19-year-old from France named Tony Parker. Undersized, unknown, and unafraid. The rest of the league called him a gamble. Pop called him the future. A year later, they reached deeper into the world. With the 57th pick, the Spurs drafted a wiry left-handed guard from Argentina, Manu Ginobili. Nobody in America knew who he was, but in Europe, Manu was a legend, fearless, creative, and impossible to contain. Pop once said, "He took 5 years off my life every game, but he let him play because the chaos worked." By 2003, the Spurs had built something new, the Big Three, Duncan, Parker, and Ginobili. A trio that blended structure, speed, and madness into perfect balance. Duncan was the calm, Parker the blur, Manu the storm. Together, they were unstoppable. That year, the Spurs stormed through the playoffs, defeating Shaq and Kobe's Lakers, Dirk's Mavericks, and Jason Kidd's Nets in the finals. Duncan's Game 6 was a masterpiece. 20 points, 20 rebounds, 10 assists, and 8 blocks. The Spurs won their second championship. Duncan claimed another Finals MVP, David Robinson retired on top, and the torch passed to a new generation. But Popovich wasn't satisfied. He reloaded. Bruce Bowen became the defensive shadow no star wanted to face. Robert Horry joined as the clutch assassin. And by 2005, the Spurs had evolved again. Tougher, smarter, deeper. They beat the defending champion Pistons in 7 games, and Duncan earned his third Finals MVP. In 2007, LeBron reached the finals for the first time, but against San Antonio's machine, he never stood a chance. The Spurs swept Cleveland, and Tony Parker became the first European player to win Finals MVP. 4 titles in 8 years, a small market empire built on discipline, loyalty, and the belief that ego kills chemistry. The Spurs weren't chasing attention, they were chasing history, and they caught it. After their 4th championship, time began to whisper. The Spurs were still great, but the league was changing fast. Threes were multiplying, offenses were speeding up, and the old Twin Towers style was fading into history. Many thought the dynasty had peaked. Popovich thought differently. He saw evolution coming and chose to master it before anyone else. By 2011, Duncan was older, Manu and Parker carried the load, but a new name was quietly entering the frame: Kawhi Leonard. The Spurs traded fan favorite George Hill to get him, a move that shocked the locker room. Popovich loved Hill, but he loved the future more. Kawhi wasn't flashy, wasn't loud, and barely smiled, but he had hands like grappling hooks, a silent intensity, and a will that couldn't be coached. Behind the scenes, the Spurs were reinventing everything. Chip Engelland, their shooting genius, rebuilt Kawhi's jumper. Popovich rebuilt the system. The Spurs that once dragged games into the mud were now playing symphonies: pace, space, and precision. It wasn't just basketball anymore, it was art. In 2013, they reached the finals against the Miami Heat, a clash between system and superstardom. Up 5 in Game 6, the Spurs were seconds away from glory. Then came the shot. Ray Allen, corner, perfection. Miami stole the series. For any other team, it would have broken them. For the Spurs, it forged them. A year later, they came back sharper, faster, deadlier. The offense was liquid, 10 passes before every shot. Everyone moving, everyone trusting. They didn't just beat Miami in the 2014 finals, they dismantled them. Kawhi Leonard, only 22, was Finals MVP. Duncan added his 5th ring. Popovich called it the most beautiful basketball I've ever seen. The Spurs had evolved again, from power to poetry, from structure to symphony. They weren't just winning anymore, they were teaching the world how the game should be played. The chapter that once felt eternal was turning its page. On November 2nd, 2024, Gregg Popovich suffered a stroke, a moment that paused time in San Antonio. After 29 seasons, the NBA's all-time winningest coach officially stepped down. Popovich will now serve as president of basketball operations, moving from the bench to the blueprint. Mitch Johnson, long groomed under Pop's guidance, is now head coach. A new mind raised in the old way. But while the Popovich era on the sidelines ends, the culture he built remains intact. Because at the center of San Antonio's next chapter stands Victor Wembanyama, a generational talent drafted first overall in 2023, the tallest and most skilled prospect in modern history. His game stretches physics. His mindset echoes Duncan's quiet fire. Popovich saw him not as a savior, but as a student, another piece in a program that values process over hype. Wemby has already shown flashes of what's coming: dominance without arrogance, potential without limits. The Spurs front office is evolving too. New analysts, new player development minds, and a modernized system all orbit the same principle: patience. San Antonio doesn't rebuild, they retool. They evolve. The Popovich legacy isn't leaving, it's multiplying. From the bench to the boardroom, from veterans to prodigies, the Spurs are once again building something bigger than basketball. The dynasty's second act is being written in real time, led by a French phenom, a global fan base, and a coach who became an architect. The Spurs way didn't end with Pop, it's beginning again with Wemby. The Spurs story was never about the scoreboard. It was about what the game could become when played the right way. From George Gervin's effortless grace to David Robinson's discipline, from Tim Duncan's humility to Popovich's wisdom, San Antonio proved that greatness isn't an act, it's a habit performed over decades. Now the torch burns in new hands. Victor Wembanyama walks beneath those same banners that Duncan hung, chasing echoes instead of applause. He doesn't have to be the next Tim Duncan. He has to be the first Wemby, molded by the same culture that turned quiet men into champions. The Spurs don't hand you a crown, they hand you a standard and tell you to raise it higher. Gregg Popovich may no longer patrol the sideline, but his fingerprints are everywhere. In the film room, in the gym, in the values stitched into every jersey. The coach has become the architect, guiding the next generation, not through commands, but through example. His story has already been written in banners, but his influence continues in blueprints. Every era of Spurs basketball has been a lesson. The Iceman taught flair. The Admiral taught order. The big fundamental taught patience. And Popovich taught that winning without integrity isn't really winning at all. So when you look at San Antonio today, a small market team in a big market world, remember this: the Spurs never needed validation, only vision. Dynasties fade, but foundations endure. Because the Spurs way isn't a playbook, it's a philosophy. Do your job, respect the craft, and serve something larger than yourself. The banners will age, the arena will change, the names will rotate. But the soul of the Spurs, that quiet, relentless pursuit of excellence, will never die. Built in silence, remembered forever. The Spurs way. Because true legends don't vanish when they lose, they echo. Dynasties don't die, they evolve. One fades, another rises, and the game moves forward. The 2019 finals weren't an ending, they were a passing of power. From the kingdom that ruled the decade, to the man who reminded the world that even empires can bleed.